Hey there, Ron Sullivan, your online hitting consultant. I want to talk about drag today, obviously. And most importantly, I want to share with you what I've learned about drag. Some of the mistakes that you tend to make when you work with lots of kids. So I've worked with over 1,200 parent-player combos. And of course, every player is different. And so if you're a teacher, if you're open to it, you'll learn a lot. And drag has been one of these things that obviously lately I've been calling it a beginner pattern. In that if your player uses this pattern of movement, you're probably in the right place, believe it or not. I know that's hard to see that right now through all of the problems that you're seeing in production, what have you, but what kids are showing us out of the gate is that they have a basic understanding of centripetal force. This is a great little athlete here on the left. You know, he doesn't care what his swing looks like in slow motion on video. Somebody handed him a big long stick and they said demolish it, right? And he's doing the best he can to do that. So what kids do out of the gate is the biomechanics that they're showing you, the mechanical operation here is supporting what they think is the right energy. So this is something I had to learn a lot because, you know, when you look at this and you don't see the root problems here, you're going to get a player in a lot of trouble. Okay, and so understanding first and foremost that this is a good sign out of the gate instead of, oh my God, we've got a bad habit here, is an important step because his body is doing exactly what he thinks he needs to do to throw the bat through the zone as hard as humanly possible with 65 pounds. Okay, so this is really important. The first step in drag is understanding the approach and intent problem. Too early on, most people will make the mistake, especially use videos, you'll immediately point to the biomechanical problems of drag and seeing the difference between Alex Bregman, a 3-hole in a major league lineup, and a kid, and you go, oh, well, look at the elbow shapes. And that becomes your root problem. You're going to be in trouble because that's not actually the root problem. So let's go to the first problem I want to talk about today, and the main difference between Alex Bregman and a little boy or a girl is, oh, that's a terrible drawing, but there's a plate. And we'll put a ball in the middle of the plate, and I'm going to show you what every little boy and girl think hitting is. And I'm exaggerating here to some extent, but this is the good part of the bat. And they're just going to take the good part of the bat, and they're just going to swing it around the backside of their body, around and behind the plate, around the plate. And at some point of going around the plate, they're going to hit the ball, and then they're going to go all the way around. And this is why, you know, a lot of kids won't put the good part of the bat on the ball on the tee that are learning because they're not thinking about the good part of the bat. They're just taking the stick, and at some point going around, they're going to hit the ball. All right, and this is literally the main difference between what Alex Bregman and this little boy are doing, right, is Bregman doesn't think of hitting like this, right? So anytime you're in a controlled environment like this with the ball sitting still, I'm working back through space. So we're just charting the good part of the bat. Good part of the bat works through space like this. This is why you'll hear coaches, good coaches, talking about hitting the ball the opposite way or something like that on a tee. It's not necessarily because we want to recreate that ball flight in a game environment. It's because when we're doing work in a closed environment like this, if I'm not doing this, what's the point? Working around a ball that's just sitting still doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'll make one more reference line, right, that shows the flight of the ball coming in. So relatively speaking, pitch balls come in on a straight line, okay? And notice the difference right out of the gate here, the problems that we have. So if I have the red here that kids have, we're always going across space, right? We're never going back through space, and that's where balls are coming from. So you can say, well, okay, so the basic difference here between pros and kids, approach-wise, is the idea of what we mean by get inside. Now, I'm not talking about the mechanical operation of getting inside here. I'm just talking about the intent of saying, oh, okay, I'm taking the barrel and I'm working it back through space. One of the things that I use as a tool, and you know, this doesn't solve a lot of the problems of hitting, but it starts players off in the right direction. It's giving them an idea of where's their side of the back of the ball and where's the catcher's side of the back of the ball. And that window, right, is what I'm trying to move the good part of the bat through on a ball sitting still. Right? It makes no difference ever to move a barrel around a ball that's sitting still. Okay, so if I'm going to work back through space and learn to work back through pitches, this is one of the biggest root problems you have in front of you. Is every kid learning is just moving the big long stick around the ball, and they smother and go across the left-hander side. And this is why you see a lot of kids go over the top and on the ground, People say, oh, they're rolling the wrist. No, they're throwing their barrel around the ball, man. It has nothing to do with the wrist they're doing. They think that that's a thing. I'm just throwing the barrel around and I'm hitting. Take care of that root problem and you'll make a lot of progress. If you're a firm believer in that form follows function, this is a great example. A lot of kids, if you just address that in the early years of making them mindful of what their barrel is doing in space, you will see that the arm-hand unit becomes an extension of the idea of the barrel. Right? So making players mindful of what their barrel is doing in space is a huge part. And this is why in the first part of my online program, we try to work on the intent problem. Not the mechanical problem, but we're saying, hey, where's the good part of your bat? Let's move it through there, because they don't do that, right? So we try to address that. So let's talk about the obvious issue that most people want to talk about, right, is the arm-hand-barrel unit. So the first mistake that a lot of people are going to make, and listen, every player is a little bit different, but this, for the majority of players that have this level of drag, you have to recognize what I'm going to talk to you about today. Right, so the top hand arm is what most people would consider the main culprit of all the problems. The early slotting, this arm being like this, people go, okay, this arm is steering wrong. Where's the top hand drill to make my players steer it better? Now, obviously, we have drills for every mechanism in the hitting process. And is it possible that this little boy needs to learn how to use the top hand arm better? Of course, right? But that's not the root problem biomechanically for this player. All right, and I hope to prove this to you today. Right? And hopefully you've never heard this before and you're like, wow, that's a different way of looking at it, because it is the right way of looking at it. Right? So I want to ask you a question. You take a little boy or a girl that's playing the game and they're right hand dominant. They throw with the right hand, they kick soccer balls with the right hand in this age group, they dribble with the right hand, they rotate from the right side to their left side or the right side around their left side, right, naturally. And then we take them and we say, all right, I want you to hold this big long stick. To us, it feels like a little bitty 27-ounce bat. To them, it feels like BB core, okay, given their size and strength levels. And we put this arm and hand as the closest length, or the closest link to the length and the weight of the big long stick. Now, the next question I'm going to ask you, which arm and hand is going to do the most work? Now, believe it or not, as obvious it is to you now that I've told you this, most people aren't even thinking about that. They just say, well, this elbow is doing something wrong. And actually what the top hand arm is doing is two operations that are totally wrong, that aren't supposed to be top hand specific things. Number one, it's doing all of the directional work. It's saying, hey, we got to go that way. So the hand's dropping for most kids. The top hand arm in this type of movement is doing all of the, hey, let's go that way. Bottom hand serves no purpose in that, in this type of movement. And so the top hand arm is steering the bat. All right? That's the first problem. It's doing all of the steering. So 95% of the work is being done by the top hand arm. The bottom hand is just kind of in the way and along for the ride. The other problem with this is they've learned to control and manage the centripetal force. In other words, the source of energy to go, I'm just going to whip this around. Well, the top hand arm is supporting the throw of the centripetal force, right? So it's directing that as well, right? So what I'm getting at is the first problem many of you are going to take, or the misstep that many of you are going to take. So if you take this little boy and you say, hey, this arm is doing something wrong, and what that will eventually mean is they're steering it wrong, right? And you're going to go, let's do a drill to help you steer that better, right? Because obviously, you see over here with Bregman, his elbow is behind the knob of the bat, as people would say. Right, and so you're going to go, well, we've definitely got to learn how to steer that different. So if you remember back to what I said is the root problem here, you'll understand why there's a hole in that logic. Why would I take a player that thinks that the top hand arm is doing everything? They're literally, get this, they're steering everything with this arm and hand. And then I come in as a coach and I say, well, you're steering it wrong. It's got to steer this way. So then you start doing drills to teach them to steer it different. Well, you're not taking care of the root problem. This arm is not doing all the steering. And it'll just exacerbate that problem. Now, what ends up happening with a lot of people, and I've ran into this myself, is that you get a lot of T-swings where you go, okay, well, that looks better. The elbow looks fantastic now. And you throw them a ball and everything goes out the window. Well, why would that happen? Well, if the player can literally make I'm going to try to steer the elbow behind the knob of the bat, that is a push all the way. Right? And what's going to happen in a game environment is the athlete doesn't care about what their swing looks like in slow motion. It sees a ball flying in, it's got to move really fast. And so what the brain is going to do, exactly what it's doing here, it's going to say, I need to move fast. You haven't shown me a more efficient way to move fast, so I'm going to do what's the next best thing, and that's drag. Because drag, literally drag, is a much more efficient energy source, what he's doing here, than trying to keep the elbow behind the knob of the bat to push the arm better. That's the worst case scenario for your player. So you want to make sure you don't treat it that way, because you will definitely see in a live hitting environment you didn't actually fix anything. It looks better on a tee, you feel better, right? But it's not going to actually convert in a game environment, because centripetal force is needed. And if I don't have any centripetal force, I'm going to rely on the drag, because it is a straight up centripetal force movement. That's what the athlete's looking for. All right, so you want to take this approach that I'm giving you right now, is understand this. And of course, we're not going to solve the problem of your player today. I don't go, here's a drill, because I don't look at it like that. Every kid's different. What I'm going to tell you are the root problems. You need to take this player and teach him that the bottom hand plays an equal role and responsibility in the arm-hand barrel unit. We do that in my online program in trying to treat the balance problem here in the working mechanisms, right? That the bottom hand needs to learn, if at the very least, the bottom hand should be the one that says, hey, let's go that way, out of the top of the swing. Kids don't have that at all. That's why their hands drop, is the top hand arm is the one that's saying, hey, let's go that way. And so you have to treat this as a balance problem. And so we do a lot of what I call physical therapy type reps, and trying to get players to rethink the role and responsibility of the arm hand barrel unit in the program. Now, the last thing I'm going to give you, I hope you've never heard this before. The problem of drag can easily be seen from the ground up. One of the things that I've started kind of leaning towards in my analysis of drag is that the top hand arm and the elbow functional problems that we see here, a better way of looking at that is a property that drag exists, instead of saying that is drag. Now, let me say this real quickly before we move on from the ground up. Is the last thing that you want to do to a little boy and girl learning the game is treat this problem as the top hand arm cannot be dynamic. In other words, it is important that the player has the capacity to early slot the top hand arm for getting to the outer third of the plate at times. And we don't get to see this very much, but professional athletes, they have to make adjustments. And sometimes we have to fight off pitches in a two-strike scenario or something like that. That's going to be a very useful tool for your players as they grow up in the game. And if they learn that the top hand arm is not dynamic, in other words, it can never early slot. You always got to have the elbow behind the knob of the bat. I'll show you a player that will have a lot of holes in their approach, right? Because we don't want to create a rule that the elbow has specific rules and positions in space. Take that from me, from experience. Don't do it. The top hand arm has to be dynamic. You want it to be dynamic, not in a stuck, rigid position where, so as we move on, though, from the ground up, it's very important to recognize this. Drag is a problem from the ground up. And hopefully this will demonstrate. This little boy is making about as athletic and explosive move as you can possibly make at 65 pounds. Right? The problem with drag is not that you can't hit balls hard with this approach. If it was T-ball for the rest of his life, I would probably build around what he's doing here. But many of us know that pretty soon pitchers are going to have 3 pitches and can throw the ball over 80 miles per hour in 9 different parts of the zone. So the problem with drag is not that they can't hit balls this way. At some point, when the big diamond comes especially, you'll see a player that will have no adjustability, because what they're doing from the ground up is they're using their body like a catapult. And this is the real problem of drag, in my opinion, is that you're using your body to throw direction. Okay? So this is, you can see this from the ground up. From the back foot through the front shoulder, this is what I call the drag axis. I literally can show you this over and over again with every player that has drag. Right, so the problem is from the ground up with little boys and girls that have this pattern of movement, because what they've learned to do is trust that this is how the body turns. Right? So they create forced internal rotation of their backside and forced external rotation of their backside, which every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So this side of the body is going to react exactly the same. Now, What I just did for most of you that watch YouTube, you went, well, that's a good sign, though. I mean, look at that back leg kicking in. For all the good coaches talk about, man. And I'd say, phooey, right? I'm not talking about what the back leg looks like, right? I think we could all say, I guess Bregman's knee is doing some magic move here, right? I'm not talking about what the back knee looks like. I'm talking about how he's using his back leg. Whenever you use your leg and your knee and your thigh and your hip to throw where the barrel is going to go, you're in trouble, because that's not a function of the lower half. The lower half does not throw direction. The lower half supports direction, and it can help us create energy, but it does not throw direction. And this is the problem. We're not talking about what it looks like. We're talking about how he's using it. So kids will use their front hip socket as the platform for this rotation, right? And this is all wrong. That's the major difference between, another major difference between what Bregman thinks hitting is and what little boy thinks hitting is, right? Is he says, nah, I can turn from here. In this controlled space, balls are sitting still, nothing exciting happening here. I can turn right from the middle of my body. Symmetry is something that kids don't have. If you wanted to look at anything, if you wanted to call hitting at all rotational, the biggest problem with the rotation is that one side of their body, everything back here is just throwing around the front side of their body, and that's not what we're doing. Okay, so in my online program, we work on what I call the foundations or core movement exercises, especially of late, where I'm trying to get players to think about from the ground up completely different. So I have a lot of core movement exercises without even a bat in the hand, where I'm trying to get a player to think of their leverage, stability, balance points, their counterbalance points, reprogramming the athlete to use their natural athleticism, right? Inviting that back in as a solution instead of what the behavior they've learned makes sense for their small frames of using their backside to throw bats, but that's not what we're doing at all, right? So what I've shared with you today, I hope something was new, okay? Drag is not an elbow problem. The first part of drag is the intention is wrong, or the intent and the approach. They don't understand the basic rules. What am I trying to do with this bat? Well, we're not just trying to go around the plate until we run into something. Our direction is very important. So using the player's back side of the ball, the right-hander's side of the back of the ball, and the catcher's side of the back of the ball is the window that we're trying to move the good part of the bat through. It won't fix everything, but you certainly want to make sure that they understand that detail. We're not just trying to go around space. In the arm, hand, barrel unit, it's not an elbow problem. You don't want to treat it as the arm is not steering right, because that's part of the problem. They're doing all the steering with that arm, so you want to find a more balanced approach in teaching them that both arms and hands have an equal role and responsibility down the line in terms of energy and direction. If the bottom hand is not in charge of any of the direction, you're going to raise a player in the game that's not going to have a good adjustability. Some of you won't see this until they start showcasing, when the pitchers are really good. Right? The last problem is from the ground up. Right? There is no such thing as kids don't know how to use their legs and hips. Right? They don't use their body on top of the ground correctly in the beginning stages, so you want to teach them good leverage, stability. You want to teach them where we're counterbalancing from. Right? And if you do these things, you treat root problems. Try to look past what you see on video. And anytime you hear coaches on YouTube just giving you what it looks like, right? Where they go, here's the problem and what your player looks like, and they should look like this. They probably haven't spent any time trying to understand what kids are actually doing. They just know that your kid doesn't look right, and you're going to respond well to going, just do this sequence drill. Okay, that'll fix it. It won't. It won't fix it the way you want to. If you really want to build a hitter, man, you've got to understand what the problem is. Ron Sullivan, your online hitting consultant. Thanks.